I'm not going to particularly address Norman's questions in terms of what we do about the growing volumes and diversity of data sets. I'm sort of speaking on that topic at the MBN conference later today, actually, so hopefully it's recorded and you'll get a chance to see that. But that leads me to my apology that I can't stay with you beyond the first break. But I certainly recognise what Norman's saying, and I think we're almost a victim of our own success, that we've engaged lots of new people. Technology's made it much easier for records to be collected, and I don't think that's going to change. It's only going to possibly increase as a challenge for us as a community. But my talk today is really more focusing on, I guess, things which are short-term, near-term things that are starting to develop around biological recording, which sort of on top of what we're already doing in a way, so perhaps a bit more future-looking. So I'm going to focus on two areas of things that BRC. So this is a huge topic, clearly, so I'm not going to be able to cover everything. So I'm going to really just focus on things that BRC are sort of involved in or getting some work involved in some work in particular technology areas. So the first of which is artificial intelligence, which again is a big topic, a term which is bandied around, but within that are concepts such as machine learning, so computers learning to do things. Deep learning is sort of very complex ways of developing that understanding, and neural networks is a specific technique to help with classification of images or audio signals, for example. So this picture illustrates the two features really, which is having a photo, being able to detect things in the photo, and then being able to label them. So this classifiers that things like, you know, if you Google glasses and things like that will do this job. It's become much more accessible, this whole area of technology, particularly because of the move towards driverless cars and autonomous vehicles, etc., which need to be able to identify things very quickly to make decisions. So this has been around a while, but it's starting to become prevalent within biological recording worlds. And I just want to illustrate two things that we're involved in. So this video illustrates a automated light trap camera pointing at a light source at night, and when it detects an insect landing on that light, it tracks it, which you can see as the lines, and then it tries to identify what the moth is. I wouldn't pay much attention to what the classifier thinks they are at the moment, because it's trained on a different data set and not in the UK, but CH are starting to run these traps, and we're particularly focusing on them in areas where it's either not safe to do traditional monitoring or where places are particularly remote. So it's clearly got its place in providing a sort of a more automated, more repeatable way of doing things. So we know the trap, you know, will operate the same way in different places, and it will only get better in terms of being able to detect insects on a light screen and be able to identify them. So that's sort of coming down the road, I think. The second way that AI or image classification is being used is in mobile devices. So you perhaps are familiar, I think iNaturalist has already been talked about, but that has something called Seek, which is its partner image identification tool. And it's also within the iNaturalist app now, I think. So it helps recorders narrow down what they think they've seen based on a photo. And these are clearly getting better, and they'll get better as more images are collected and the algorithms are trained. So there's 2 or 3, these are sort of some of the main apps are out there that do this job with varying success. But we're starting to use these within, I think our interest in this area is really not to just use it as an identification tool, but to use it to engage new audiences and provide additional ecological information to support those communities in monitoring wildlife. So we are developing, I have been developing something called Surveyor, which is aimed at farmers particularly so this is really to try and break down the taxonomic barrier for people to contribute biological records. So the concept is that a farmer would have sown a field margin and he wants to know how well he's done. He'll go along and take pictures as long as field margin of all the plant, mostly in flower, but it can deal with non-flowering individuals. And then those images will be sent to an image classifier, in this case using the PlantNet classifier. And it will tell you what it thinks the image is and show you similar images. So wild marjoram is the example here, and it shows other images that it's got in its library which look similar. So you can see, so you can sort of review this and think, well, did I get this right? And then when you've settled on your list of species, the app then looks at the value of those plant species for pollinating insects. So how well is your field margin done in growing flowers that are beneficial to insects? So it gives a sort of scoring system for individual plant species and overall using ecological information. So that's sort of another area we're starting to develop some ideas. But yeah, really using image classification to sort of lower that barrier of identification for different communities. So the second thing I just want to talk about in terms of developing technology is it's got various different terms, but things like precision citizen science or adaptive sampling, where the concept is that you give information back to recorders as to where their data may contribute to the onward use of that data. So where their recording can make most impact is one way of thinking about it. So this is really to get to there's a growing requirement for biological data, lots of policies from government and local use, hopefully a move towards more nature recovery. So we need to understand important places and how they're changing, for example. So our demand for biological records is growing from lots of places, but we know that our current data set is highly spatially biased. So this map on the left, this contorted map of the UK, or Britain actually, shows it sort of weights vice counties by the number of records. So our fattest bloated vice counties are often in England, and generally, relatively speaking, we've got fewer records from Scotland and Wales. Clearly this is unfair because the diversity may be different in these different places, but it sort of illustrates the problem that we've got more records from where more people live, effectively. That's on a GB scale. If you look locally, similarly, this is butterfly data through a region not far from where I am, sort of Buckinghamshire area. So we have lots of data, but it's often very concentrated areas. So we have lots of gaps. So if we want to know anything about what's happening in those gaps, we potentially need more data or need models to fill those gaps. So the project that we're involved in is called Decide, which you'll hear a bit more about in the next year or so. You may have seen it already on social media, for example, which is trying to provide tools and models to understand this topic and what people think of it, whether they're motivated to go to places where they're asked to go, and how they like that information provided, for example. So please go and look at that website and give your feedback on the tool, try it out in your area. But the concept is, as I said, we've got gaps in where we need information. So some way of, so we have good data for large scale trends. So I think we're getting better at understanding biodiversity change at the Britain level. And we have good data on site, often at site level management for tracking the quality of sites and how they're changing. But as I say, we've got lots of gaps as to where people need data to make decisions. People want to help by recording and make a difference. So potential solution is to use models of where we think species are based on their relationships with habitats and climate, for example, and communicate those models back to recorders, both the predictions of where species are, but also where we're most uncertain in those models. So the way to improve these models is to reduce the uncertainty by collecting data from places where we are uncertain. So the way this tool works is combined across species, look at where we're most uncertain, where observations have already been made, and where, therefore, it's best to collect new observations to help improve these models. So the Decide tool sort of looks like this. So it gives you a map zoomed into your area. I think it's a 500-meter circle around an area with a sort of a fog or a hotspot map to show you areas where the tool thinks is the highest priority for collecting new data, and puts pins on the maps as to where you could focus your recording, taking into account things such as access routes, land that's impossible to access, so shouldn't hopefully send you to dangerous places like airfields or military areas, and also includes information on important sites, for example. So this is currently under development, and it's being run as a project where it's trying to co-develop, co-design the tools with recording groups. So there's focus groups in Yorkshire and London, I think, but the tool's available anywhere. It's currently focused on butterflies and day-flying moths. In the coming year, we'll also have an element of the project using these lightweight, cheaper LED moth traps because clearly if you suggesting people go to different places for recording moths, a challenge is the trapping equipment required. So it's to use these lightweight traps to help focus that community or work with that community. So that was a sort of 10-minute overview of a couple of things that we're working on. As I said, this is a huge topic and we couldn't cover everything, but I guess the two main things that we're working actively on are around image classification and also audio classification for bats and birds as well, for example. And also this idea of providing feedback to recorders to help inform them as to where there are gaps in models and where they may be able to contribute to improve that understanding. So thanks very much. So I'll stop sharing now.
David, we have a comment from Andrew Lucas. Says this is really exciting stuff, especially directing recorders to fill gaps. And then Tammy says, thank you, David. Some exciting developments coming. There have obviously been a lot of taxonomic name changes in recent years, but the species dictionary in iRecord does not seem to reflect a lot of these yet. When will this be updated?
So we rely on the UKSI to sort of as a standard for the nomenclature that we use, and clearly used by recorder and things like and tools like that in the NBN. So we're reliant on updates happening in the UKSI, and then the changes that may be mentioned there may already been made at the UK, and then we need to bring them into the iRecord, which we've now do reasonably regularly. We've sort of automated a lot of that process. So I think there is a sort of bottleneck here around the UKSI, I think, in terms of getting those names updated, but I think we can't really we don't have the resources to build our own dictionaries alongside it. But if there's specifics, please feed them back to me or Martin Harvey or Chris Raper at the NHM, and we'll try and get them pushed through.
And David, there's a question about the target date for launching Decide.
It's available now as a prototype tool. So there's they're gathering feedback now, and then they'll produce a new version for next field season. So yeah, it's available to try out now and give feedback, and join their mailing list, for example, and you can be given updates on when new tools are developed. So it's a 2-year project, I think. It's about 1 year through. So it's got another season of trying it when the insects are flying.
Great. And sorry, get some questions coming through. Is this pilot version based on butterfly and DF moth data?
Yeah, so Butterfly Conservation are a partner in the project, so it's based on the data holdings through the Butterflies for the New Millennium project and the National Moth Recording Scheme data sets. So yeah, and I know, as Norman said, there's good links to butterfly conservation in Wales, so those data, your data would have fed through into those national data sets.
So, and Richard from Covenant is asking, recorders often focus on good habitat and focus their effort on areas where they are likely to find rare species. Will Decide help with this recording bias? Well,
it will highlight that issue, I think, that we're probably lacking data from less interesting places. So whether that, and I think a key part of this is whether that's really a motivation for recorders. You know, we can't take it as read or take advantage of recorders in terms of what they want to do. But for those recorders who do want to collect data that will contribute to these ways of using the data and other for other applications, then at least we'll make it clear where they can make those differences. Whether they actually do or not is up to them, clearly. But what we're finding is that people often find surprises when they go to new areas. I think sort of assume that there's less interest in some areas when you may well discover new populations of specialist species, for example, in the butterfly case. So, yeah.
And David's asked, what do you see as the downside of to automated recording on the recording community?
Yeah, I think this is a good point, actually, that, and I'm always keen to emphasize that we don't want to lose the involvement of people in recording and wildlife, because then they'll inevitably become less interested in wildlife and less interested in the solutions. So we're trying to find ways that would use technology alongside what people are interested in doing. And that goes for all the things we're doing, really. So although they will become automated tools, and they're already automated bat detectors that are quite widely used, I think they can just complement what we're already doing. And particularly for the automated moth image work, the traps are quite expensive, so we see them as being most valuable in areas that are difficult to access. So we've been working with Network Rail about potentially on the rail network, and similarly, there could be examples in military training areas or remote islands, and also, particularly when we do some of our international work, there's clearly challenges collecting biodiversity data in many different places. So, yeah, I guess my point is, technology should not replace or take away the interest that people have in wildlife recording. It should complement what they're doing and hopefully either make their lives easier or allow us to do things which we couldn't do in other ways.
Thank you. Kate says that I think a future challenge for alerts is how we handle information gathered by apps that are more for public engagement and lack the detail of a traditional record.
Yeah, iNaturalist came up, didn't it, as a topic? So that is one, live example of that issue, I think. So we are bringing the iRecord data, the iNaturalist data into iRecord. So when Norman reviews the moths for his area, that will include the data from iNaturalist. So he doesn't need to go to too many places to review data. So that's one way of tackling it. But I think it's inevitable there may well be new systems coming along in 2 or 3 years' time. So it's going to continually change, I think. It's a challenge for all of us to how to manage this sensibly. I'm not sure there's necessarily always an easy answer, but I guess where BRC is trying to invest its time and effort is around the verification role and try and improve the tools available for experts such as Norman, and maybe look at whether we can automate some of that process that Norman mentioned around large yellow underwing. So we could at some point trust the image classifier to get that species accurately recorded from photos, and if it's within the known range, which I assume it's everywhere in your region, we could accept those records as being okay. And so Norman focuses on the challenging and more interesting species when he's putting his valuable time into it. So that's sort of one potential direction that we're trying to develop things. But yeah, it is a challenge. I think that we want to involve new people, but it comes with a cost of complexity and extra burden on busy people with the expertise needed.
And along those lines, Berwin said that some of the concerns with the use of AI image recognition for facial recognition in humans has to do with biased data sets returning false positives. Could this be an issue for identification if certain species are more commonly recorded than others?
Yeah, so it's a good point. I think we are starting to try and look at that. I think we can test for those sorts of effects and then try and improve the classifiers. And I'm sure they'll continually, they do as well as you feed the information in. So as we feed in more effectively tagged images, then it will only improve. But yeah, there certainly are biases in those techniques, and they clearly won't work for everything, and they're very dependent on the photos that are taken. And I see you've got a session on what makes a good photo later. I think that's an important part of this, really, in terms of the communication.
And John Carlin just commented that I agree, neglected areas are often surprisingly fruitful. And Phil said you showed how flowers can be linked to pollinators which occur on them. So presumably you can do the same for their larval requirements.
Yeah, that's an area we're starting to develop next, is to look at the how those plants support Phytophthora insects, and also potentially how they link to beneficial insects, particularly in the farming context, to sort of improve the sort of sustainable management of farms, or give information to help those sorts of issues.
Right, we have time for a couple other questions if there are any out there. Hopefully I didn't miss anything.
Hi, Brad. Can I just point out, I have a problem this morning. My chat facility doesn't seem to work, which may be a good thing because it stops me asking questions. So if somebody can give me some technical help on that, it'd be appreciated.
Okay. Phil, do you want to ask a question verbally while you're on?
Not specifically. Actually, most of the recorders seem to be asking the questions I would have asked anyway.
Great. Thank you.
Well, I'm happy to receive emails, questions anytime. So if anything crops up, please email me. I'm sure it's dbr@ch.ac.uk, or I'm sure if you Google, you'll find me. So yeah.
David, I've got one more to just come in. I checked the account of a recorder using iNaturalist for fungi. 97% of her verified records were wrongly identified. How are the verifiers for iRecord BIS going to manage such issues? Will iNaturalist be changing the way they work in regards to global coverage and verifiers to aid sharing of records to UK?
Well, I think that's sort of why we're keen to have a review by UK experts through iRecord, for example, because iNaturalist uses a sort of crowdsourced view, and that can lead to the crowd getting it wrong. So iRecord is sort of, the concept we use is wisdom in the crowd. So there's key people who have that expertise and wisdom to really make the decision. So probably a combination of two are the ultimate solution. But yeah, I think with any data set, you need to be cautious about how you treat it. So I think, don't take it as read that if it's achieved what they call research grade and iNaturalist, that it's completely right. I think, just remain skeptical in data you'll bring into your end users. Great. I'm gonna have to